when to pick up a speculative closer, what to look for in middle relievers. Should you worry about your closer being traded to another team? Plus, some updates on murky bullpen situations all around Major League Baseball. We'll talk all things relief pitchers on tonight's episode with guest Doug Dennis of Baseball HQ, all coming up next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always, Ruvain Guy. What's up, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. A lot of sports today. You got the Mets, the Knicks, the Rangers. All the New York teams are doing well. What a year for New York so far, other than baseball. Yeah.
Well, it's not just them. I mean, the Boston area, they have the Bruins going. They have the Celtics. Denver has the Avalanche, have the Nuggets. Dallas has the Stars and the Mavs. So there's a lot of teams from multiple cities still in the playoff hunt and playing baseball also. I know it's taking a back burner for a lot of people, but yeah, they're still playing baseball there also.
Yeah, interestingly, it is possible to have both in the NBA and in the NHL, New York versus Boston and Dallas versus Denver. That is a possibility to do that. That would be wild. A lot of good metropolitan areas. I'm sure the networks are enjoying that very much. All right, well, we got a great show today from Baseball HQ. Please welcome Doug Dennis. How are you, Doug?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, our pleasure. And as we do on the show, we get right into it. We're going to talk about relief pitchers, some closers. Doug does a great job doing the closers and relief pitchers over at Baseball HQ, so we wanted to get his take on a bunch of strategy items, a bunch of situations, and whatnot. So start with you, Doug. You know, talking about closers, and I'm not sure if people are using the term handcuff anymore, but basically the next in line, let's say, to possibly be closer. Question is, what is the value of having that on your team? I mean, it does take up a roster spot. Pitcher, may or may not have value other than the saves, but of course, if you have a closer and then he gets hurt or does poorly, you already have the person on your roster. What is the value, or is there a value, of having a closer handcuff on your roster?
I wish there was a quick and easy answer for this question. I think that the most important thing to me when I'm thinking about something like that is how good is the skill set of the person that I'm thinking about acquiring. Are they somebody that I could see doing a good job as a closer and therefore hold the job rather than just be a placeholder or somebody who comes in for a couple weeks till they find somebody better? And so it's a complicated question, but I look for a really good skill set, maybe one that's better than the closer in the first place. But I worry often about that closer righting the ship and then coming back. And if you have to use up too many roster spots chasing saves, you're probably not doing very well. So I worry about using too many roster spots on saves, particularly in leagues like, the NFBC or something like that.
So, Ruvain, I'll ask you this. Is it more worthwhile to have a middle reliever who's excellent? We're talking about somebody like a Brian Abreu on the Astros. Just great skills, but won't get any saves. Or is it more worth it to have somebody like, I don't know, Kevin Ginkel, who may not be the closer anymore with Sewell back, but he's obviously the next in line? Like, which is worth it more? A closer handcuff who's okay-ish, or is it worth it to have the skills guy who may not have any saves in them?
Well, I think it depends on your situation. If you don't want to get a fifth, like a fourth or fifth starter, and you want a middle reliever just to plug in there and to help your ratios and get a vulture save here and there, then a guy like you mentioned is perfect. You just plug Brian Abreu in, and he can just play every day. You don't have to worry about him. You have no issues. He may get a save here and there if the closers have a day off or they're about to blow it, or they can even vulture or win. Having the handcuff, I think is only really good if you're really nervous about the closers that you have, and I think that's the biggest issue. If Doug said it's a matter of the skill set of the player or the middle reliever or the backup guy who you're thinking about taking, but you have to think about the closer who's there. How safe is he in his role? Where is the team located? Are they going to be sellers at the trade deadline? Are they going to be in it for the long haul? They trying to win their division and they need a solid closer, and maybe they're going to trade for one, or maybe they're going to not have enough leash on the current closer, and that would make the secondary guy more valuable.
Anything to add, Doug, on who you would prefer?
No, I agree completely with Reuven. I would say that it's good to have a good, safe middle reliever early in the season while you're kind of sussing out what starters are actually viable, which ones can really hurt you. I think that someone who an example for me would be someone who quickly saw that Reed Garrett was in a role where he could vulture some wins. He's giving you strikeouts. And then as the season progresses through April, these starters get stretched out a little more and some of this goes away. But in April, it's particularly helpful, I think. And then late in the season, it becomes more helpful again when the starters get really tired and you really are trying to preserve ERA and WHIP as opposed to gathering wins and strikeouts if your team is set up that way. So it's very situational, but I think it's more important at the beginning and then at the end of the season than it is in the middle.
Yeah, you mentioned Reed Garrett. Finally, a good player on the Mets, right? He's a guy, and I want to get your take on him. I mean, we're talking about a .43 ERA right now. Now, that's obviously not going to hold, but he's got about a 2 SIERA, so he's legit good according to that. He's somebody who's got an 18% swinging strike rate. It's almost a 45% strikeout rate. His ground ball rate is 45%. I mean, we're talking about a guy who just looks absolutely locked in, and he's going more than one inning. He's going 2 innings at a time. The Mets are putting him in high leverage situations, so he's going to end up vulturing a lot of wins. He's got 5 wins already. I was on the Baseball HQ Radio podcast earlier today, and we're talking like this guy can end up with 10 wins on the year if they use him in the same type of situation and he stays healthy. I mean, what's your take on Reed Garrett? How valuable is he? To me, he reminds me, not in terms of his style or stuff, but in usage of like Chad Green. Come in, for the right spots, pitch more innings, get those strikeouts, get those wins, and a guy like that, we're talking like a $7-8 player, even in like a 15-team mixed league.
No, it's like you read my notes. I mean, that's exactly how I feel. That's why I brought him up, because I think that a guy like him can be very valuable, even if he has some regression, which I would expect some. But I think the Mets trust him in this role, and this role is incredibly valuable for a guy who has good skills. So if he's that guy, and somebody grabs him early in the season and is just kind of enjoying the ride right now, that's probably better than a lot of the starters that people are having to play, given all of the injuries to starters this year. So I do think he's valuable.
And he's also got a higher K rate this year so far than Edwin Diaz, which is kind of interesting to think about.
Edwin Diaz, as we are recording this, is blowing the save in Philadelphia. So, yeah, that's kind of the story. Listen, Edwin Diaz is going to be the closer, but I can see Reed Garrett filling in when needed, vulturing the wins. This guy is uber valuable. I mean, Brian Abreu, does he? I don't have him on any squad of mine. It's just because a lot of the teams that I have, I just don't have the room for him. If I want to have a closer or a backup closer, and I have a guy like Yanier Cano, who I think could be next in line, right? It's a matter of opportunity cost and in roster space. If I was in an AL only league, no problem. I would definitely roster Brian Abreu. I just can't see it in a mixed league when I just need the room for saves. I mean, are you rostering Brian Abreu in anything deeper than like a 12-team mono? Anything shallower, I should say?
I don't have Brian Abreu on any team. I don't have Yennier Cano on any team either. But let me just say, it depends. I mean, if you really need those incremental saves, then Cano's the right play. If you really need that incremental amount of ERA and WHIP, then I think you'd probably rather have Abreu than Cano because Cano has, he started really well last year too, but he kind of fades as the season goes on. His strikeout rate isn't very good. His strikeout minus walk isn't very good. I'd rather have Abreu. I know Abreu started poorly this year, but I mean, he's a better pitcher, and so over the balance of the season, I think if you're looking for some kind of ERA or WHIP preservation, he's better than Cano. But I mean, most people aren't going to roster relievers except for getting saves, and so if that's the play, then you only have so many roster slots. I mean, it's a luxury to have extra relievers as it is. It just sort of depends on what it is you need as the season goes on.
And Cano would have more value as for saves because he would vulture more saves in Baltimore than Abreu would in Houston just because of the pecking order in each place. I mean, the way Kimbrel's pitching right now, it's very hard to see him. It seems like everywhere he goes, he has an issue. Whether it's with the Dodgers, whether it's the Phillies, he always has this little bit of swoon. He usually figures it out toward the end of the season, but I mean, one of these years he's not going to figure it out. And do you want him on your roster blowing up every other start? I mean, is it worthwhile, Doug? Is it worthwhile to if Cano's available? Do you grab him if you have Kimbrel just in case?
If you have a slot, I would say yes. I think people do constantly pick up guys like Cano, hoping that it works out. But you can really blow your entire fab budget chasing guys like that, and so you just have to be really careful about whether or not you think Cano is not only going to supplant Kimbrel, but do so for some months rather than for a short period of time. It's because of the amount that people are spending to compete to try to get them.
You mentioned blow your fab. So the question, Doug, comes into timing. Early enough, if you do this early enough, you'll get them for virtually free, right? You don't have to spend. If you wait until the closer struggles and it becomes the guy, then all of a sudden you have to spend a lot. The question is, when should you pick up a closer handcuff? What are the warning signs, or what can you see from the struggling closer and the good stuff from the handcuff to make you say, you know what, let's get this guy an extra week or an extra 2 weeks early and pay less of a premium? Like, what are the signs, and when do you say, okay, let's act now?
I would say that when the closer has a poor strikeout percent and a poor walk percent, something's wrong, and you really want to get that secondary guy. And I especially think so when that secondary guy is pretty locked into being the setup guy. He has an excellent strikeout rate, he has an excellent walk rate, and you can see that dichotomy. And if you see that, I mean, not that that happens all that frequently, but when you see that, it all it has to be is relatively better too. Then you can have some confidence that it may not be this week, it may not be 2 weeks from now, but eventually he's going to take over because that first guy isn't getting it done. Sometimes those guys rebound it early in the season, but we get into late May, June, if they're still not getting it together, that and then you really you may have already missed the boat. That's what I look for though, is that secondary guy having much better skills than the first guy, and even be projected to have better skills than the first guy. And that's not so infrequent, honestly, in Major League Baseball. There's probably 5 or 6 every year where that's true.
So Ruvain, Doug is talking about looking at the actual skills of the guy. Are you maybe more interested, or maybe not, looking at, the closer blew up 2 times in a row or 3 times in a row? Are you doing it based on recent performance, or do you also agree that just take a look at overall year-to-date skills?
It's a little of both. I mean, it's if you start seeing that he blows two or three in a row, and then all of a sudden they say that they can give him a break and let someone else close, or have him go in and pitch in a situation, a non-save situation. That's a little worrisome unless they're able to figure out and turn things around. But I think Doug hit it on the head there. I think that's you're looking for the walk rate, you're looking for the strikeout rate, and one of the guys that pops into my mind about this year of someone who his walk rate went through the roof and his K rate went down actually is Adbert Alzolay from the Cubs. His rates completely flip flopped. His K per nine went from 9 to 6, and his walk rate went from 1 to 3. And then all of a sudden you find out, oh wait, he's injured. So you know there was something going on, and they try to play through it. And it's hard to decide when it's going to happen, but usually 2 or 3 outings you see that. But if it's for 2 or 3 weeks, like not just 2 3 outings, not just like one or like a week, but if you see it for 2 or 3 weeks and you start to see a trend where the manager doesn't feel comfortable in using him in safe situations and starts putting him in the eighth inning, and it's not like a high leverage situation, that's when you have to think about considering getting the backup.
Yeah, I have a lot of Hector Neris shares. I had him before the season, and I increased it during the season. So I definitely saw the same thing with Alzolay. So yeah, it is a little bit of both. I do agree. Now, when the time does come that maybe it's an injury, or removing for performance, Doug, what is the guidance on what we should do in terms of fab, how much we should spend? Now, obviously, it's always going to be situation dependent. How bad are you doing in the category of saves? How bad is your team doing overall? How much money do you have? So, yes, it's always situation dependent. But maybe do you have some general guidance or some strategic guidance on what kind of percentage of your budget you might consider to spend on fab on a closer that comes up mid-season?
Yeah, I'm very cautious and often miss out on these guys, and the reason is I'm worried that if I spend fab on a guy and he's a placeholder for 2 weeks and gets replaced, I'm gonna have to do it again, and then I might have to do it again, and then pretty soon I don't have any fab for the other needs that my team might have. And maybe you really need saves and you don't need anything else, then obviously you can spend more fab on that. But if you have other needs, then you may want to be more cautious. One of the things that I look at again, when we talk about the skills, I still think that's a really important part of it, because if the person that you're spending that fab on has elite skills, you have at least some confidence that if they get the role, they'll be able to hold it all season. Whereas if they have kind of iffy skills, then the team is probably going to continue to look for somebody better throughout the year, even if it's a trade in July, if nothing pops up before that. And so you have that worry in the back of your mind. So I would spend a little more if they have elite skills and it looks like they have the job or are going to get the job in short time, then I might spend a little more. But typically I'm very cautious because I don't want to do it 4 or 5 times, and just have my fab eaten up by that throughout the season.
I like that. A lot of great points there. Anything to add, Ruven?
Yeah, I also think it's team dependent. Whether the team is, like I mentioned before, if they're in contention, whether they're a bottom feeder, it depends whether the pitcher that they're replacing is out because of injury or because of just poor outcomes. I think if the player's out because of injury, then you can spend a little bit more. I think you can spend anywhere between 2 and 10% even per time you think a closer is going to be available, only because if you know a guy's going to be out for 1 to 2 months, like we know Yon Duran was going to miss about 6 to 8 weeks. You could have spent, like, if you wanted to, $50 or even $80, even up to $100 on Fab to get his replacement, because you knew that you're going to get about 2 months of that replacement. And I think that's how you have to look at it. Also, is there anyone else? Just like Doug said, if there's anyone else behind him, is he going to have his job for only a week or two? Is it going to be for 2 months? It's all a matter of who they're replacing, whether it's based on poor outcomes or whether it's based on injury.
So you mentioned trade, and there's always the possibility that a closer will lose his job when they get traded. Of course, there's always the possibility then after that happens, there's another role to fill because their frontline guy has been traded away. Do you at all? And I don't do this. I don't really think about this at all, Doug. But do you actively think about, oh, okay, who's going to get traded? Stay away from them. Maybe trade them to another team early. Do you shy away from drafting people because you think they might get traded mid-season? Oh, they're on a crappy team, and yeah, they'll just dump them in the end. Like we're talking about a guy like Tanner Scott. Tanner Scott on the Marlins right now, still holding on to the closer job. I gotta imagine that he's probably gonna get traded, right? I mean, the Marlins are going nowhere. They've already started their fire sale. Got to be the guy to get traded, and he's not going to end up being a closer. So is this a guy that you're going to sell high on? Do you do this in general for anyone and say, all right, they're going to get traded, let's sell high. Don't pick them before the year starts, that sort of thing?
I think about it all the time. Of course, as we get closer to the trade deadline, you have a better idea about who is contending and who's not. I do think Tanner Scott's a very good example, especially because he's left-handed, and when he's right and not walking too many guys, he's devastating. So a team could definitely use him down the stretch, and the Marlins could get something good for him. So he's definitely a guy who could get traded. I look at teams even like Houston has a huge bullpen. If they don't get back in this race pronto, come the trade deadline, they may try to divest some of their elite, excellent relievers to try to add assets that get them back in the hunt, in the future. St. Louis is another team that if they can't figure out how to get in the race, they have an excellent bullpen of guys they could trade. I'm not saying that they're necessarily going to trade their closer, but if they get an offer for the closer, why not pull the trigger? Because they have other guys that can come fill in and do the job. I'm almost certain that the Boston Red Sox intend to trade, Kenley Jansen and Chris Martin because they're on the end of their contracts. So, what does that look like? Who will Boston use if they trade those guys? Where will they go? Those kinds of questions are obviously important to know, and to try to figure out, who's a contender that really needs their services and has something to trade. Yes, absolutely. Those things change the value of those players, but also changes the dynamic in any fantasy league if they can read the tea leaves correctly.
Yeah. Are you thinking about that, Ruvain? Because I know when I drafted, I wasn't. I mean, I have Tanner Scott on a bunch of teams. As the preseason went on, he got cheaper and cheaper as he was struggling. But I really just drafted him because who knows? Who knows if a guy gets traded? Who knows? We didn't know the Marlins would be this bad, and all their pitchers would get injured. We thought a little bit more. Do you put any thought into this?
A little bit, but not that much, because you're still going to get 3.5 months worth of saves, and you don't give those saves back once they're traded. That's not how it works. But when you compare a guy like Tanner Scott and Kenley Jansen, I'm more comfortable drafting a Kenley Jansen because where he goes, he's probably going to close. Tanner Scott may just be the lefty specials coming out of their pen. So it's a matter of who you're drafting and who you think is going to close if they go someplace else. Like David Robertson, whenever he's closer, whenever he gets traded, he's always the second guy. He's never the closer. So there's certain pitchers, certain relievers that are always, they have to be closed. Like whenever Kimbrel, again, we'll bring up Kimbrel, whenever Kimbrel gets traded, he never works out pitching in the eighth inning ever. He only really does well when he does well. He only really does well in the ninth inning. So it does, I mean, I think about it a little bit when I'm drafting, but you're still, like I said, you're still going to get 3.5 months worth of saves, and those saves still count.
So, Doug, when is it time to drop a struggling closer who might have lost a role? I mean, if Kimbrel loses his role, could be temporary, I don't know. Is it somebody that you're going to cut? Alzolay? Well, I cut him on whatever team I had him. When is it time to know when to just cut bait on somebody where you don't think that they're going to have future value that year?
If I have a slot to reserve them, I will do that. If I don't have a slot to reserve them, I really cut them and don't look back. I might be, I would say for somebody like Alzolay, it was an easy call. For Will Smith, an easy call. For Kimbrel, not as easy a call because it's a little murkier because Cano is not an elite skill set. If Cano had an elite skill set, I think that the Orioles wouldn't look back. They'd just stick him in there and he'd be the guy. But I'm a little more, squeamish about just cutting Kimbrel. On the other hand, I may not have a slot, and if I don't, then Kimbrel goes. I'm not going to wait around.
Well, Well, I have one question for you, Doug. Though, what do you do with a guy like Joel Payampas? He was a closer. He's not the closer. He's not pitched well. He has pitched well. That team is not that great, but they're still getting in a lot of save situations. Would you be feel comfortable dropping him at this point, or is he a guy you'd still hold and see what happens?
If you have a slot, hold him. If you don't have a slot, though, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, that guys like that are hard to hold when you have a need that you could easily fill if you just weren't holding him. And so it makes it an easy decision, I think. But a lot of it is your team and whether you have that slot. And if you do, then that's a nice luxury to have, and you hold him. But if you need an outfielder or something else, then why are we holding a guy hoping that he's going to get back in there at some point?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these answers to these questions, and, we do these strategy sessions here because we want to help all our listeners listening as to what to do. And it's really, a lot of it is going to be context dependent, your team dependent, the rules of your league dependent. We can't tell you every single thing to do in your own league, but we can give you some good general strategy and guidance. Hope you think about what the right decisions are and then be more informed to make the best decision on your team. Which is the best opportunity cost. If you're dropping Playopus and picking up, who's worth more in the long run? It's really something that you got to evaluate on your own, but hopefully we're giving you guidance on it on the show here. Let's talk about closers on bad teams. Now, if you're in a mono league, you're going to roster the Rockies closer, and you're going to roster the Oakland closer, and or anybody who's on a bad team. Now, Oakland closer might have some value. Otherwise, Mason Miller is great. Michael Kopech's been great for the White Sox. The question is it in general worth owning closers on bad teams in mixed leagues? What's the depth? In 10-team leagues? No. In 12-team leagues, maybe. In 15-team leagues, really depends on the situation. Like, what's your guidance in terms of, is it worth owning? Is it worth owning any Rocky at all, ever?
I don't. It's been a long time since I've wanted to own a Rocky reliever. I don't see it at all right now. But take Mason Miller. Mason Miller has two things that are a huge advantage to him. One is he's being used in a traditional all saves kind of role where he's getting those opportunities every time they come up, as opposed to some of the teams these days where they split the role, and different guys get them depending on who's available or what the situation is. And then the other thing that I really look for is, does the closer have elite skills? And Mason Miller does. So if you have both the traditional all saves kind of role and elite skills, I would roster him over a lot of other closers who have to share the role or have some other reason that they're not going to get as many saves, even while their team is winning more games.
What do you think? Is Mason Miller going to get traded?
I don't think so. I don't think Oakland trades Mason Miller because they have control over him for a long time and he's really cheap. Now, if a team comes along and overwhelms them, then sure. But I think we could say that about just about any team that is not in the hunt. So, no, I think they're going to keep Mason Miller this year. I certainly would if I were Oakland. I would try to figure out how to get him back to being a starter without getting hurt if I could. But whatever number of innings I could get from Mason Miller, that's what I would want.
Yeah, and I'm just so used to Oakland being the team to, you have a closer for a year and then trade him and go on to the next one. But I guess Miller is just above a certain line that we got a lot of team control, and this definitely is more worth it on our team. We're probably not going to get overwhelmed. All right, so I do want to talk, Doug, about you are known now in the expert community for the Doug Dennis strategy. Pretty good to have a strategy named after you. And a successful one. Of course, you don't want to be the guy named after a crappy strategy. But the past 2 years, you've won Tout Wars. And you've had... Well, why don't you actually tell the strategy to everyone? It really centers around not spending a lot on starting pitching.
Well, it's around not spending a lot on pitching at all and spending extra money on offense, hoping that you have an offense that can overwhelm the other teams on offense. And then also capture ERA, WHIP, and saves punting, really two categories, wins and strikeouts. So you have to thread the needle in two ways. One is you can't miss on these other categories. And then the other part of it is no one team in the rest of the league can dominate the league because you're kind of capped on just having 8 categories that you're competing in. So there's risk obviously with it, but I got very tired of not finishing above the middle of the league, or because my offense wasn't any good. So this was one way to solve for that problem.
Do you find that this strategy works better now as opposed to like 10, 15 years ago?
Yes, because 10 or 15 years ago, there the number of elite middle relievers has exploded, where you can roster any number of middle relievers for free. You can in fact you can stream them for $1 a week, and just put up as many zeros as you want in ERA and WHIP, and even vulture some saves because the roles are they're interchangeable on some teams. So yeah, back when it was just a one mono closer, you had to pay up for those mono closers who had skills that get you the ERA and WHIP. And nowadays, you don't have to pay nearly as much, and you can cover a bullpen. You can do some of these things with 9 slots where you don't have any starters. So let's say if I'm trying to get, I'm making this up. Let's say Minnesota's bullpen, I could get Duran and Jax and Brock Stewart, and those 3 slots. Make sure I get all the saves that the Twins have to offer, even when Duran gets hurt. So that's kind of the thinking behind it. But yeah, it's pretty cheap once you get past the closer to those secondary guys, and their skill sets are just as elite, if not better.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing a calculus on saying, well, I can get more points out of the total. Like you get more points out of offense by throwing more dollars in offense, and you're being efficient with your money by just going after three categories essentially, and you're sort of doing the calculus. Now, just to clarify, this is done in Tout Wars, and the reason is because there's no innings pitched minimum. Is that correct?
That is correct. With an innings pitched minimum, you couldn't do this at all. Other leagues that I'm in, they all have pitching minimums. In fact, that are increasingly difficult to reach because starters don't stay in as long as they used to, and you only still have 9 slots to try to get those innings. So I find that those leagues are much more difficult to even roster 3, 4 relievers. You have to really, go with 2 and hope that they get you the saves you need. Saves become much more secondary. But in a league like Tout, where there's no innings requirement, you can get 9, and you can also put 1 on reserve, and you can also, willy-nilly throw 1 away and get a different one, just because of matchups or things like that, to try to incrementally give yourself a better chance.
Right. Did you try to employ something similar, or at least go cheap on starters in labor? If I recall, were you in the same league that I proxied for Ian Khan for NL labor?
I was in NL labor. You're talking about this year? Yes,
This year.
yes, I'm in NL labor.
Okay.
I typically have spent less on starters than other teams, but my strategy in labor is I try to trade for them in season. So I don't go in trying to have a balanced roster. I just try to get as much value out of hitters as I can because I think that it's stickier, and then I try to trade in season to try to improve my pitching.
Right. So it worked to perfection, this strategy, the last 2 years. This year, as far as I remember, it's going like murky. Do you have a reason why it's not working as well this year? Is it process, or maybe just somebody else tried to do it, which you said is a problem? You need to really be you need to really be the only guy doing it, and not have somebody run away. Is that the issue that's going on this year?
No, nobody else did it, so I felt pretty good about that. I didn't have any trouble rostering pitchers, And I actually don't hate the pitchers I have, but the hitting side has gone completely sideways. I've had
Okay,
injuries,
okay.
I've had problems. They're very middle of the pack or lower. I don't have as many plate appearances as maybe five other teams, even though I spent more money on offense. So that's really the biggest problem and almost impossible to overcome. I think the pitching side is going to go as planned, but it's only three categories, and I don't even think I'll get. I think I'll probably lead the league in saves, but nothing else. I probably won't lead the league in saves in ERA and WHIP the way that's going either, because the teams I went for I went for the Rays guys, so I got Fairbanks and Adam. I went for the Twins, so I got Duran, but I didn't get Jax because somebody else paid like $5 for him or something that was absurd. So I didn't do that. It's just been one of those seasons. But I would say that if you employed this strategy 10 times, you'd be happy to win too. I don't think that I think winning back to back is kind of fluky in a way, because you really need things to align in a certain way, and they did those 2 years. They're definitely not aligning this year.
Probably not fluky, but sure, you're not going to expect to win every year, but definitely something to compete. Very interesting. And we're going to talk about a couple of specific closer situations, but first, the Injury Guru's Trivia of the Week.
Alrighty, so we're gonna talk about certain closer situations right now. The first one we're gonna bring up is Philadelphia, and I was looking into their bullpen a little bit, and right now the Phillies have the best record in the majors. And when you're looking at a relief pitcher, some important stats like we mentioned are K rate, and walk rate. So of their relievers, this is the trivia of their relievers of the Philadelphia Phillies relievers, who have had at least 10 appearances, which pitcher has the highest K rate, and which one has a lowest walk rate
Oh, dear.
of
Yeah, I
Phillies
don't know that
relievers?
off the top of my head. I'll tell you the guy that I like in that bullpen, and that's Orion Kerkering. But I don't know that he's had, he had a late start to the year, so it's probably not him. But that's the guy that I
No.
really want.
So right now. Well, Ariel, you have a guess?
I mean, yes, highest walk rate is Sir Anthony Dominguez.
No, actually. No, actually. The highest walk rate I have here is Alvarado. Alvarado is at a 10% walk rate. Hoffman's at 8%, and Matt Stram is at 1.6% walk rate. And the highest K rate is also Stram at
Ah,
44%. So he's actually putting up the best peripheral numbers, yet in today's game, he came in the fourth or fifth inning. He seems to have the most value as a middle reliever, but right now, Alvarado is 8 for 8 for saves, and Hoffman, he actually blew a save today, but he's also getting the save opportunity. So, Doug, of those three guys, who do you think ends up with the most saves by the end of the year? Alvarado, Hoffman, or Stram?
I think Alvarado, the way things are going right now, it's interesting because I would like to say Hoffman would get more saves than he's getting. I always have looked at this as a bit of a job share because of the left and right side capabilities. Strahm is more of a multi-inning guy who started last year. He started as a starter for the first month and a half, and did a great job, and then got shuffled into middle relief. And he was getting these two. When a starter didn't go very deep into a game, he would be the guy who would come in. And I still think that the Phillies look at him that way, where he can keep them in the game by bridging to Alvarado and Hoffman. Now, Alvarado gets hurt every year, so if that happens, I do think Hoffman will jump in there and get some of those saves, and it could flip. But I think it's Alvarado and Hoffman, and then after that, Kerkering, because I still think Kerkering's the best reliever in that pen, and at some point he could assert himself.
let's go to the Baltimore situation. Kimbrel struggling a little bit, and they're using some of Yenier Cano and Daniel Colombe to pinch in for some saves. What's your take, Doug, on the bullpen there?
I think that they're already transitioning to Cano. I think Cano is going to get save opportunities for the near term, and unless Kimbrel can really right the ship immediately, he's going to get these kind of lower leverage or weird opportunities where he's not in save situations. I think Colombe is great. He's a very, very good left-handed reliever. I don't think Baltimore is planning on using him as a closer unless Cano and Kimbrel both fall down, and then he might get some save chances, but that would be more of an emergency situation from their standpoint. So I think Cano's a good play right now. I think he's a guy who's emerging as someone who will get save chances and probably is already getting them and without them, directly naming him the guy.
Yeah, I'm assuming you agree, Ruvain, because we own Cano on a couple of teams, and we were talking last week on who to drop, and you're like, don't drop Cano. He's going to be the guy.
Yes, and that's why we drafted him in a bunch of leagues because I didn't have any trust in Kimbrel just because of his track record that he always seems to fumble sometime during the course of the season and loses his job at some point. But Colombe, he has the better numbers. He has a better K rate, better walk rate, and a better strand rate than Kimbrel or Cano. So if Cano doesn't do what he's supposed to and fill in the role the way he did toward the end of last year, they may have a short lease for him also and just put him back into the eighth inning.
What about the Tampa Bay situation, Doug? Peter Fairbanks and Adams. We know Fairbanks just came off the IL. Jason Adam has been good so far. I own Jason Adam in every single league that I own Fairbanks as the handcuff. But what do you do there? I'm almost feeling that I'm wasting a roster spot because I'm doubly owning, and I'm not picking up other people because I'm holding the spot. What are you doing? What should the advice be for Tampa Bay guys? Or just, try to avoid that situation in general because who knows what the Rays are doing. They give saves out to anybody. Even the foul boy that gets some saves there.
They do spread them around at times, but what happened last year was Fairbanks was terrible in April, much as he was this year, went on the IL, much as he did this year, and then he came back and was lights out for the rest of the year, and they just used him as the closer. And Jason Adams really didn't get saves after that. Up to that point, he did get saves. Every once in a while, the lefty, Posh would get, those guys would get one or two, but it was Fairbanks. So I still think that that's likely impossible here. I don't know why this year might be different from last year. We just have to see how it goes. But Fairbanks just came back. He just had an outing where, he was put in leverage and it worked out fine. So I wouldn't be surprised if in short order he's back as the closer. Adam is setting him up and it continues on that way. Now, if Fairbanks gets hurt again or if he's ineffective, then Adam's the guy. I mean, there's really no second guy, especially now. I mean, they used to have a lot of depth. They don't really have as much depth as they used to have in their bullpen. So I do think it's down to those two guys. But and for now, I would hold both because you don't know. But if history repeats itself from last year, you're going to have plenty of saves just from Fairbanks, and he's going to be fine. It just took him this long to kind of get it going.
Ruvain, talking about the Minnesota situation, you got Yohan Duran, who's coming back from injury. You got Griffin Jacks, who's, okay. Duran has that walk-up song, right? All of a sudden, the stadium lights go out, and they play. I don't even know what they're playing there, but it's a whole thing. He's the guy. Is that the way it works? If you all of a sudden you have the great walk-up song, you're the closer, and just put our 100% faith in Duran, or should we? Whoever still has Jack's shares, should they be holding on to him for a little bit more?
Well, I think you should hold on to Jack just because he's putting up pretty good numbers at this point. I mean, he's got a 45% ground ball rate, which is pretty good. His K rate's at 30% also, and Duran, he's still coming off of injury. He's still not 100%. I think they're mixing and matching right now, but there is that intimidation factor. So yes, when he comes in, there is that stigma of him coming in, so it gets the crowd into it. There's a whole big thing that goes behind it, and I think it does intimidate the other team just a little bit, even though the players probably won't say it. But I think Duran is the guy, but Jax, because of the numbers he's putting up, he's a pretty valuable guy. And listen, Duran had I believe it was an oblique issue. If that flares up again, Jax is right there, and there's no, I'm not saying that it will, but there's always a possibility that it could. So Duran is still the guy, but Jax I think it's going to be more like a 70-30 until Duran is completely healthy.
All right. Any disagreement?
No, I think is exactly correct. I think Jax is valuable. I think he's going to get a share of the saves. I think he'll probably get a share of the saves all season long because, Duran, as great as he is, they sometimes want to use him, in a high leverage situation in the seventh or eighth, and they'll let Jax close. So I do think that Jax is going to get a share of the saves all season long, and has some value just from that alone. And as Ruben says, he's a ground ball guy and he gets those outs. He's very consistent. I like Jax a lot.
Doug, any other situations to talk about that are maybe murky, or you have a good thought for our listeners?
I would point out the Dodgers, where Evan Phillips is on the IL right now. You just want to see when he comes back how he does. If he's fine, then he'll go back into the slot, and Daniel Hudson will go back into setup. But if Phillips is a little bit shaky or not as consistent, I think they'll continue to use Hudson. But they like to use one guy, so you just have to kind of see how it turns out when Phillips comes back. But it's not automatic that he just comes straight in and does the job. Hopefully, from the Dodgers standpoint, he does do that, but it's not a guarantee. I'd also point out the Cincinnati Reds, where Alexi Diaz is terrible so far this year. He's giving up home runs. His command is off. He's walking too many guys. The problem for the Reds is they don't really have a second guy to throw in there. Now, Fernando Cruz has a great strikeout rate, and he actually even has a great strikeout minus walk rate, but he's very inconsistent. And from one outing to the next, he's either striking three guys out, and then the next he'll give up 2 runs. So that lack of consistency is probably holding him back. But any bullpen like that where there's trouble both with the closer and with the setup, you start wondering like, okay, who's it going to be? But it can't go on like this. Those are the kind of teams I look at and try to figure it out, because if you can figure that out, you can probably get a guy cheaply who ends up being a closer.
Well, what do you think about the Washington situation? Because Kyle Finnegan, he is the guy, but Hunter Harvey is having a really, really great season. And is Kyle Finnegan a guy that may be traded, that you may want to, think about picking up Hunter Harvey in that situation?
I love Hunter Harvey. Hunter Harvey's one of the best pitchers going. He seems to get hurt every single season, and it's usually about the time when Washington decides they want to slide Finnegan back and put Harvey in the closer role. It seems to have happened like 2 years in a row, and it's going that way again this year. Harvey, by the way, leads the league in holds, which is interesting to me, just because that he's locked into that role, and he's much better pitcher than Finnegan. He just is. Finnegan's good enough that he's getting the saves right now. So I think as long as it's working, they're not going to mess with it. But the minute Finnegan has even the slightest hiccup, Harvey would be in there. Now, if they could trade Finnegan to somebody, I don't know who that would be, because his peripheral numbers aren't great. But if they could do it, I'm sure they would. But for right now, as long as it's working for them, and it is. It'll be until it stops working. I don't know when that'll be, but yes, yeah, Harvey's terrific, and I love situations where you have a chance to get somebody like. Of course, everybody knows Harvey. That's the other problem, is that it's not like everybody in your league isn't also saying the same thing that we're saying. So, if you try to get him, like if he's on somebody other team, because he probably is, trading for him isn't just you don't have to you have to give something.
All right, let's talk waiver wire, and we'll come to our waiver wire section. Doug, who is somebody or a couple people that you would like to pick up this week off of your waiver wire and use some fab?
Well, I thought about this, and I actually decided I would look and see who's available in our TGFBI league to kind of judge who we could pick from. And
that's right. We're in the same TGFBI league. That's right.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
So somebody who's been super hot the last 2 weeks is Eddie Rosario of the Atlanta Braves. Just in the last 2 weeks, he has 11 runs, 4 homers, 8 RBIs, 4 steals, and a 353 batting average, and he's only 38% owned. So he might be somebody I would grab just if I needed to fill in for a week or so until he goes back to being Eddie Rosario. But I mean, he's been hot the last couple of weeks. And then another guy that I really love, and I'm just waiting for him to call him up, but if I can get him cheaper now, I'm going to do it, is Kobe Mayo, Baltimore Orioles third baseman in the minors. They can't just keep running Ramon Urias out there, and he's only 33% owned. So I think that he's, get him and stash him and hope that he gets called up soon. I feel like it won't be long, but to me, it's already been too long. So those are the guys that I would look at from a waiver wire standpoint.
Yeah, I had Rosario on my list. I mean, this guy is on pace for a 2020 season, and he's not going to hit, sub 200. He's probably not going to even be a 250 hitter, but 235, 2020, very, very useful. All right, Ruven, who else would you like to pick up?
Well, I got three guys. First two guys are almost carbon copies of each other. First one is Jake Bowers. For the past week, he's hitting 375, two homers, two stolen bases, and that's playing only 5 games because he's in a platoon right now at first base with Rhys Hoskins out. He's batting 235 in the year, but he also has 4 homers and 4 stolen bases. He's eligible at first and in the outfield, and he's only 6% owned in CBS, so he's getting playing time now. He's a guy you should think about. And another guy is Luke Raley in Seattle. He's also only 7% owned in CBS right now, but in the last week, he's batting 429 with 2 homers and 2 stolen bases, and that's in 6 games. 1 month ago, he was batting 176 for the season, and now he's batting 276 for the season. So he's really turned it around. He played really well last year in Tampa. Now he's out in Seattle, and he may have found it, and he's a guy who can get you stolen bases and give you some power. The third guy I want to mention is a guy if you have room on your roster, you may want to think about now because you can get him really cheap if he's available, and that's Noelvi Marte. He's suspended right now. He's supposed to be back around June 20th, June 19th, and he's only 31% owned in CBS. If you have room on your bench and you want to stash someone, if instead of stashing a prospect, well, he is a prospect, still a prospect, I guess. If you want to stash him, he's a guy you can get very cheap right now. And right now, according to ATC, rest of season, he's supposed to go 314 with 5 homers and 6 stolen bases. And with the amount of injuries in Cincinnati, he will get playing time when he comes back.
Well, you read my mind on Noelvi Marte. Absolutely, it's the right time to start thinking about him, especially if you need a big boost in the end. Eduardo Rodriguez, another guy who might be available on the waiver wire. He usually pitches well, even coming back from injury, so you might think about him. A couple of quick names to mention. Mark Vientos on the Mets. I mean, I don't know why the Mets are not playing him, but at some point, he's got to be forcing his way into the lineup and get some playing time. He looked great when he's been up, shown that he can handle the major leagues. Mark Vientos for deeper leagues. A little bit more shallow. Leota Tavares could be interesting for maybe a 15-team mixed league. Zach Neto, I mentioned last week. He's still just 25% owned on CBS. He stayed hot this week. He's going at a 15-20 pace. Zach Neto is interesting. And Tommy Pham, still only 20% owned on CBS. He's 15-team mixed, a must, I think, and maybe even viable for 12 teams. Got 2 homers, 10 RBIs, a stolen base, batting .319 in under 70 at-bats. So Tommy Pham is interesting. All right, Doug, on to our pitcher preview. Who is a pitcher or two you would like to pick up this week?
I really like Jake Irvin from Washington. He's been really lights out the last couple of weeks. I think he's put up some pretty good peripherals throughout the season, but he's really picked it up of late. And he's available in our TGFBI league. So,
I got to write all this down here. Pick up.
Yeah, write it down. He's a guy I'm going to go for.
Eddie
So you're going to have to
Rosario.
outbid me, to get him. But no, he's got a 10 strikeouts against 1 walk the last 2 weeks in 12 innings. That's pretty good. 1.50 ERA, 0.83 WHIP. I'm on Jake Irvin. His next week opponent is the Minnesota Twins, and then the week after that, he'd probably be on my bench because he'd be at Atlanta. Once he got through that, we'll see.
So a streamer there. All right, Ruvain, how about you?
I have 2 guys in deeper. If you can stomach them, I'm going to tell you their names, and you'll probably know why. First one is Patrick Sandoval. He's 37% owned in CBS. He's 1 start this week. It was against Cleveland, but he's pitched pretty well. In his last 3 starts, he's got a 3 ERA with 20 strikeouts in 18 innings. So that's an option there. And I don't know if you want to, but Austin Gomber is available in most leagues. Why? Because he's Austin Gomber, but he's at Oakland this week. And Gomber's last 3 starts For Colorado, he's 1-0 with a .48 ERA in 18 and two-thirds innings with 13 strikeouts. He's only 3% owned in CBS, which means he's probably available everywhere. This is just a one-start thing. I don't know if I trust him with the two-start, but one start at Oakland, I think I'm willing to stomach that.
Yeah, well, hopefully you don't get gombered by picking him up. But yeah, Gomber has been interesting. A couple pitchers to mention, and I think this week actually is a little bit better for streaming than it has been for the past. Tyler Miguel at Cleveland versus San Francisco. Somewhat interesting upon the Mets' return. Joe Ross at Miami, at Boston, and the following week versus Chicago White Sox might be interesting for not just 1 but 2 weeks. Garrett Whitlock, high upside guy, at Tampa Bay, at Tampa Bay, and then next week at Baltimore and versus Detroit. Somewhat interesting. Alec Marsh, Kansas City versus Detroit. Then he's at Minnesota versus San Diego. He's throwing like 6 or 7 strikeouts a game lately. His ERA is 2.43 with a K minus BB of 14%. That's interesting. Michael Waka, the Royals are actually doing okay. Remember my bold prediction that they would win the division? They're doing okay. Waka to start Detroit and Tampa Bay. Two guys to mention also more. I usually don't have that many pitchers, but this week is so plentiful. Eric Fetty at Toronto and versus Baltimore. He's 4-0 with a 2.6 ERA. He is not the same Eric Fetty from years prior. This is just a totally different guy. He's reinvented himself. He's now a matchup play in 15-team mixed leagues. I mean, he is interesting, and he could be a good streaming option, and it might be okay with 2 games this week. And finally, I mentioned him 2 straight weeks already, but Alek Manoah, he's back. Now, he had a bad first outing against Washington, but then his last outing, 7 innings, 3 hits, 6 strikeouts, no earned runs. I don't know. He's probably the highest upside dart of all these guys that are going to be available on your waiver wire. Pick him up. Don't play him. Just hold him. See what he turns into. Maybe he's a pumpkin. Maybe he's going to be a Cinderella, the person of the ball. You never know, but you won't know unless you pick him up. And I guarantee you, if he's good, he'll be picked up very quickly right after. So make your chance come now for cheap. All right. Anybody else to add? I feel like I put half the slate up there.
No, I think you covered a bunch. But I don't think this is. I think it's still too early in the season to go 2 start pitchers, especially if you're concerned about ERA and WHIP. I think if you really want to go 2 start, you really should wait a little bit. So a lot of these 1 start guys are guys you just want to hold for a little bit. They're probably the way to go.
All right, Ruvain, injury update. Let's give it for this week.
All right, well, we'll start with the Reds and TJ Friedl, who was hit by a pitch after coming off. He was coming off the IL after a wrist fracture, and then he fractured his left thumb. They didn't give him a time frame yet for how long he's going to be out, but this type of injury is usually for about a month or so, 4 weeks or so. Will Benson will see some time in the outfield, but TJ Friedl is just having a lot of bad luck this year. Michael Conforto was placed on the IL with a right hamstring strain. They thought it wasn't that bad, and MRI confirmed a more severe strain. Luis Matos, who's also available in a lot of leagues, is getting a lot of playing time, and they said he's going to be the everyday outfielder. Also, because Jung Ho Lee, also in the outfield for San Francisco, has structural damage in his left shoulder. We already know he has a dislocated shoulder from an injury running into the wall trying to make a field. He's getting a second opinion. We don't know what the second opinion is, but if there's structural damage and a dislocated shoulder, there's a good chance he may require surgery. And this may be a month's return, not a few days. But keep in mind, Jorge Soler will be coming back soon for them. He is going to be starting a rehab assignment. He is actually on a rehab assignment. And Jorge Soler is my freak injury of the week. He was rehabbing. He was taking swings before a game in Dodgers before the Dodger game. And while he was playing, while he was taking batting practice, he was removed after getting hit off the top of his head by a foul ball. Interesting. He seems fine now. They said, quote unquote, minimal damage, and he seems to be okay, and he's already playing rehab games. But there are a lot of freak injuries going on. And I'm going to end with Dansby Swanson for the Cubs. He has some soreness in his knee. They're calling it a sprain. Nico Horner was feeling a little bit, but he's been in and out a little bit. Miles Mastrobuoni, I think that's how it's pronounced, has been filling in and getting some playing time. But I don't think the Swanson thing will be too bad. I think he came from an awkward slide. I do think he'll be back pretty soon, if not around May 18th when he can come back, but maybe even like a couple days after that.
Freak injury of the week. I mean, the best one was the Joey Bart one that he's catching somebody in the bullpen, and somebody hits a home run and hits him, the concussion. I mean, that's just that's baseball for you, you know.
Yeah, you never know. And I thought, and there was also there was a picture this week. I forgot who it was, but they were opening a can of tuna, I think, and all of a sudden they cut their finger, and he missed a couple of days because of it. I forgot who it is. I have to look it up, but I believe that was one of the freak injuries of the week, also this week.
Oh boy, this sport is dangerous. Doug, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was really fantastic. And for those of you who aren't too familiar with Doug Dennis, you can read more of his stuff with Baseball HQ. Why don't you tell the audience what you got going?
Yeah, no, I write a weekly column just on bullpens and relievers, kind of exploring different bullpens. This week's column is really just about holds, which is interesting because there's a lot of relievers discussed in that. But it's every week on Sundays at Baseball HQ. And then you can also find me on Twitter at DougDennis41. That's my lucky number. When I was, you like this, when I was 9, I was on a Little League team, and I wasn't there the day that the jerseys were given out. And so I got the last jersey, which was 41. And when I was 9, I was pretty sure I was going to be a major leaguer. So I thought, well, I'm going to make 41. I'm going to be Tom Seaver. I'm going to be like the greatest 41 that ever was.
Oh, that is awesome. Ruben, what's your number? Was it? What was it? No, 47?
First I had 40 when I was in Little League. I was 42. This was before they retired Jackie Robinson's number. I just liked that number, so I picked it. This was like in the late 80s, early 90s before his numbers retired. But on the team, I was number 46 because I'm a lefty pitcher, and I was modeling my pitching a little bit after Andy Pettitte, even though I'm a Met fan. I like the way Andy Pettitte pitched, so that's why I picked 46.
Ah, there you go. All right, you guys are all in the 40s. My number is 12. A little bit lower, but all right. Anyways, Ruben, how about you? What's going on with you?
You can follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come. I also tweet out who's going to be the next one up, and you can read that also in my weekly article for Rotoballer, which comes out every Saturday, Sunday, so you can get ready for Fab the following week.
And I'm Ariel Cohen. You can find my work over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer. ATC projections, rest of season are up. There's going to be a rates refresh next week, so stay tuned for that. I know a lot of people are asking, but that is in the works. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter or X at ATCNY. This week, I appear on the Baseball HQ Radio podcast. Really great long conversation with Patrick Davitt. Check that out. And, of course, right here on our show, which you're listening to now, the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. All right, once again, thank you so much to Doug Dennis of Baseball HQ for coming on the show. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.